Let's bring in the Chief Economist at the Milken Institute. William Lee is here for us. Thanks so much for joining us on the program today. Now, these talks follow Trump's trade deal with the EU, and that's not been without frustration. France denounced it, saying it was a submission. Germany warned of economic damage. But unlike the EU, China doesn't rely on the US for security and has some leverage with its grip on the rare earths and magnet market. Can China afford to let these talks play out for months and try and squeeze the US in the process?
Well, one of the difficulties about reaching trade agreements is that even when you have economies like the EU and US that are very similar in structure and how they operate, it takes years sometimes to negotiate trade deals. But with the case of China, we have such a different sense of Chinese market socialism, right? Which is very different than the American capitalism. And so the basic principles about what it is to exchange and what it is a trade deal consists of is even more difficult to negotiate. And what we learned from the first Trump administration is that the Chinese take a very long time to come to agreement with the U.S. because of these very different economic systems. As Secretary Besson says, China has been producing a lot of stuff and is good at producing stuff, and China doesn't want to partner with the U.S. the way the UK or Japan or the EU has to invest and produce in the United States. So those are I think the core differences. And China, I think, cannot afford to wait too long because it is such a great producer, it's stocking up a lot of stuff at home that's not selling abroad. And other countries just aren't big enough to receive all of the surplus production. So I think China really is incentivized to get the deal done quickly as possible.
Is there a place where an agreement could or might not be made? And how might that impact global supply chains? I mean, could the US duties snap right back to triple-digit levels and spark a bilateral trade embargo?
I think President Trump is a deal maker of the sort that really expects deals to finish quickly, and he considers himself a closer. He will come in and close the deal when the talk is stalled. And unfortunately, I think the history of Chinese negotiations going way back is that it takes a while to reach these agreements. And I think that difference in negotiating style may clash in the sense that if the talks drag on way too long, President Trump will run out of patience and he'll say, look, we will find the rare earths metals somewhere else. And that kind of decoupling would be incredibly dangerous for both sides because we have very inefficient use of resources if the U.S. were to resort to other sources of rare earth other than China.
Right, and there's been some reports that the US paused curbs on tech exports to China to avoid disrupting trade talks with Beijing and support Trump's efforts to secure a meeting with Xi this year. How likely is it, do you think, that we'll see the two leaders meet face-to-face?
I think a face-to-face meeting would accelerate talks because I think that's even a phone call led to a better understanding of what both sides are trying to negotiate. And right now, I think the easy wins are going to be to get the supply of rare earth metals to be flowing again, not just the United States, but to the rest of the world. And also for the U.S. technology to be more accessible to Chinese researchers, especially in artificial intelligence and some of the high-tech industries where China really integrates well with U.S. and using U.S. standards like NVIDIA, it will do well in accelerating its own pace of AI research. So I think there's a lot of gains on the part of China and the U.S. to integrate their two economies better. And I think that's the driving force that'll lead to a lot of these shorter, smaller deals.
Besson has said that he wants China to rebalance its economy away from exports to more domestic consumption, a decades-long goal for US policymakers. Can you talk a bit about how this goal, what this goal is, and how much credibility it has in the eyes of China?
I think China has seen that its success is in its ability to manufacture and so efficiently engineer manufacturing to the point of being able to produce cheaper and more efficiently than anyone else in the world. But unfortunately, China's own marketplace is one where its population, its consumers have always saved and not consumed very much. And because of the excess savings, China was able to invest in infrastructure and all of the equipment that's needed to make China so efficient. Now, because China is so efficient, more so than is needed for current consumption in China, it has to really convince its own citizens that we are now at a point where China is no longer an emerging market. We are, in fact, the second largest economy in the world, and it's time for consumers in China to enjoy the benefits of being an efficient producer. And that shift is something that's going to happen when Chinese consumers are assured that their Social Security is in place, that their pensions are in place, that they will have a safe retirement, they will have a social safety net. These, I think, are the kind of policies that can be put in place that will reassure consumers that they don't have to save as much as they do now, and they can consume. These are the policies I believe the Chinese are talking about right now, but putting them in place quickly will be the first step in getting a better balance between the U.S. and China.
William Lee, always great to get your insight. Thank you.